Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Flight 732 from New York was about to take off, carrying its passengers to Los Angeles. The usual hustle and bustle of the departure lounge at JFK Airport was filled with families with children, businessmen in a hurry, and a few solo travelers, all eager to reach their destinations. Among them was Marcus Taylor, a young 24-year-old black soldier, recently returned from a mission abroad. Marcus wore his impeccable uniform, his military decorations reflecting years of discipline and sacrifice. Despite the fatigue and stress of the journey, he moved forward with calm and dignity, aware of the respect his service commanded. As he passed through security and headed to the boarding area, a privileged passenger named Richard Langford, a white man in his 50s, saw him. Langford, accustomed to privilege and first-class seats, was immediately irritated by Marcus's mere presence in line. In his mind, a black soldier had no place among the elite. As Marcus calmly presented his first-class ticket during boarding, Langford made a dramatic gesture and exclaimed, "There's been a mistake. This seat is reserved for someone, well, more appropriate." The passengers around him turned to watch. Marcus, impassive, replied politely but firmly, "Sir, I paid for my ticket and I have the right to sit here." Langford, vexed and arrogant, then made a public scene, demanding that Marcus be moved. The humiliation was complete, and Marcus felt the passengers' looks of both embarrassment and support. But behind his outward calm, a silent resolve was growing. This was only the beginning of a lesson Langford was not ready to receive. Upon landing in Los Angeles, a surprise awaited Langford at the airport, an unexpected and prestigious welcome, which would turn the situation around in spectacular fashion. The corridor leading to Gate 14 was crowded. Airline announcements echoed through the air, mingling with the hubbub of rolling suitcases and passengers' conversations. Marcus Taylor he walked calmly, his military backpack firmly slung over his shoulder, his decorations discreetly shining on his uniform. Each step resonated with the discipline and assurance of someone accustomed to facing adversity. A few meters away from him, Richard Langford, a businessman accustomed to privilege, watched the scene with a suspicious eye. When he saw Marcus, he frowned. In his mind, this man in a black uniform had no place in the first-class section. He approached the line with a superior air, ready to intervene to reassert his ownership of the privileged class. Marcus arrived at the boarding gate and handed over his ticket. The young agent, smiling, scanned his code. "Good evening, sir, your seat is confirmed in first class." Langford stepped forward abruptly, interrupting the young woman, "Wait a second. There's a mistake." Marcus looked up at him, calm but attentive. "Sir, there is no mistake. My ticket is valid, and I will sit in my seat." Langford, flushed with anger and visibly annoyed, raised his voice to attract the attention of the surrounding passengers. "This seat is reserved for someone more suitable. You can't sit there." A few passengers whispered, some showing concern, others indignation. The young attendant, embarrassed but professional, tried to calm the situation. "Sir, he paid for this seat. I ask you to respect the airline's policy." Langford sneered and gestured dramatically toward Marcus. "It's not just about politics. It's about standards." Marcus, still impassive, replied in a calm but firm voice, "Standards, sir, are met when the rules are followed. I respect the rules of this company. So I ask you to respect mine." A tense silence fell. The passengers present felt the tension, but no one dared to intervene directly. Langford, frustrated by Marcus's calm and dignified manner, growled and backed away, unable to come up with a solid argument. As Marcus walked toward his first-class seat, he felt the heavy gazes on him. But what he didn't know was that this simple moment would set off a chain of unexpected events at the Los Angeles airport. Langford's destiny, and the lesson he would receive, were already in motion. Marcus walked calmly down the aisle of the plane, his boots lightly tapping on the shiny floor. The first-class cabin was luxurious, spacious leather seats, personal screens, and windows offering a breathtaking view of the tarmac illuminated by the airport lights. Marcus settled into his seat, fastening his seatbelt with precision. He placed his bag beside him and took a deep breath, ready for the flight. Shortly after, Richard Langford entered the cabin, looking triumphant but still irritated. He scanned the seats and saw Marcus comfortably seated. A sneer of contempt crossed his face. "Really?" he muttered to himself, before addressing the flight attendant. "Excuse me, but I think there's been a mistake. This seat should be reserved for me." The stewardess, polite but firm, replied, "Sir, your seat is correct. Mr. Taylor's seat is valid and reserved in first class." Langford pursed his lips, irritated that he wasn't getting the effect he wanted. He turned to Marcus with a forced smile and said, "Are you sure you're in the right place? I mean, it's the first-class section." Marcus looked up at him, still calm, and replied, "Absolutely. As indicated on my ticket, I'm in first class." Langford sighed, frustrated by Marcus's apparent calm. He sat back down a few rows away, casting contemptuous glances and muttering comments in an attempt to get the other passengers' attention. But every look Marcus gave him, impassive and dignified, made him feel even more uncomfortable. The flight took off, and Marcus calmly watched the takeoff. His mind, far from being disturbed, was focused on discipline and patience. He knew that some people act out of arrogance and that true power lies in self-control. Langford, on the other hand, couldn't take his eyes off Marcus, his contempt and frustration mounting by the minute. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Marcus took out a notebook and began taking notes on current military projects, while Langford, unable to concentrate on anything else, silently fumed. In his mind, he could not tolerate a common soldier challenging his sense of privilege. But what Langford didn't know was that upon landing, he was about to face a surprise that would completely overturn his arrogance. Marcus, with his dignity and composure, was preparing a revenge that no ticket or social rank could prevent. The plane began its descent toward Los Angeles. The cabin was quiet, disturbed only by the occasional rustling of passengers and the click of seatbelts. Marcus Taylor sat upright and serene, gazing out the window at the city below, bright and vibrant. He knew that every flight brought its share of unexpected events, but he had learned to keep his emotions in check. Richard Langford, sitting a few rows behind him, couldn't take his eyes off Marcus. His frustration was palpable. Every polite smile from Marcus, every graceful, assured movement, seemed to provoke him further. Langford pursed his lips, muttering insults under his breath, trying to justify his arrogance to himself, but Marcus remained impassive. As the plane touched down, the passengers applauded lightly, some oblivious to the tension that had unfolded a few rows earlier. Marcus fastened his seatbelt until the last moment, preparing to descend with calm and dignity. But the real surprise was waiting on the tarmac. As the doors opened and passengers began to disembark, Langford thought he saw several black limousines and photographers set up outside. His confident smile froze. He thought this was all for him, as if he were about to be welcomed like a VIP. Then Marcus stepped confidently off the plane. Photographers flocked to him, cameras pointed, flashes popping. Limo drivers approached to open the doors for him. Langford, stunned, stood frozen. Every step Marcus took toward the vehicles was a silent demonstration of his success and influence. One of the photographers approached Langford and asked, "Sir, would you like to comment on Marcus Taylor's presence here?" Langford, unable to find the words, stammered, I. There was nothing to say. The truth flashed through his mind. Marcus wasn't just a soldier returned from a tour of duty, he was a respected and influential entrepreneur, having recently entered into a major partnership with the airport, which explained the extraordinary reception. The lesson was instant and humiliating for Langford. The very thing he had tried to humiliate on the plane turned out to be someone far more powerful and respected than he was. Marcus, remaining calm and dignified, climbed into a limousine with a slight smile, leaving Langford stunned, flushed with shame, and unable to react. This moment marked the beginning of Marcus's silent revenge, a lesson in respect, patience, and dignity that Langford would never forget. Richard Langford stood frozen on the tarmac, unable to move or comprehend what had just happened. Around him, cameras clicked, reporters frantically took notes, and curious passers-by watched. Every flash seemed to remind him that he had tried to humiliate Marcus Taylor, and that fate had just thrown the truth back in his face. Langford watched Marcus climb into the limousine with a calm and elegance that made him even more unbearable. He saw photographers asking questions, filming the scene, and approaching Marcus for interviews. The black soldier he had tried to belittle a few hours earlier wasn't just an ordinary passenger, he was a major strategic partner of the airport, a recognized and respected entrepreneur, and soon, everyone would know it. The airport security officer approached Langford and said quietly but firmly, "Sir, I advise you to stand aside. Mr. Taylor is a special guest today." Langford felt a wave of shame and frustration wash over him. He realized he had acted out of arrogance and prejudice, and that he had just publicly ridiculed himself. No words could undo the humiliation. He turned away, his face red and contorted, as Marcus disappeared into the limousine, waving courteously to the reporters and airport employees. Minutes later, local news began broadcasting images of Marcus Taylor, showing his prestigious arrival in Los Angeles. The headlines on digital newspapers and social media were explicit. Soldier and entrepreneur Marcus Taylor hailed in Los Angeles. The man whom some have tried to humiliate arrives in VIP. A hero's return, Marcus Taylor leads by example. Langford watched it all on his phone, unable to look away. Every message, every notification, was a thorn in his pride. The same passengers who had witnessed the scene on the plane, or who had heard about his behavior, were mocking him on social media. Marcus, however, remained calm. He knew that true victory lay not in the insults or humiliations of the plane, but in the silence of his dignity and the power of his success. His calm and self-possession had transformed a situation where he could have felt humiliated into a quiet but resounding triumph. For Langford, this day would be a constant reminder: true power lies not in prejudice or arrogance, but in respect, patience, and dignity, even in the face of injustice. The next morning, Marcus Taylor had scheduled a press conference in the main concourse of Los Angeles International Airport. Local and national media were already there, drawn by the spectacular images of his arrival the day before. Marcus, dressed in an impeccable suit that reflected his authority and military rigor, took his place at the lectern. Behind him, American flags and airport banners added solemnity to the event. Richard Langford, meanwhile, had been invited against his will, out of a mixture of humiliation and curiosity. Every camera pointed at Marcus seemed to remind him of his failure. Langford, nervous and uncomfortable, settled into the room, trying to remain discreet, but unable to escape the journalists' stares or flashbulbs. Marcus spoke, his calm but firm voice echoing through the hall. "Good morning, everyone. I'm here today not only to talk about my mission and plans at the airport, but also to remind everyone of a simple truth: respect and dignity must prevail over prejudice and arrogance." The reporters took notes, and Langford felt a chill run down his spine. Every word Marcus said seemed to directly address the previous day's situation, never naming it, but clearly enough to make the humiliation complete. Marcus continued, "We all have the choice to judge others by their appearance, their color, or their rank. But true greatness is measured by the ability to remain fair, polite, and respectful, even in moments when one might give in to arrogance or contempt." A murmur rippled through the room. Some applauded, others nodded approvingly. Langford, flushed with shame, avoided eye contact, unable to reply. Every sentence Marcus said struck him, not with aggression, but with the evidence of his wisdom and moral authority. After the conference, Marcus stepped down from the podium, greeted the reporters, and walked toward the passengers and airport staff. His calm and dignified demeanor contrasted with Langford's arrogance, as he remained on the sidelines, unable to regain control of the situation. The lesson was clear to all: true power lies not in humiliation or privilege, but in self-control, respect, and dignity. Marcus had transformed an unjust situation into a public display of leadership and moral grandeur, leaving Richard Langford alone with his wounded pride. In the days following the press conference, Marcus Taylor's reputation exploded on social media and in the media. Images of his triumphant arrival in Los Angeles and excerpts from his speech went viral. He had never sought to publicly humiliate Richard Langford, but the effect of his dignity and calm was enough to transform the situation into a universal lesson. In Langford's office, the businessmen reread the articles and online comments over and over again. Every image of Marcus, smiling, elegant, and surrounded by journalists, struck him as a constant reminder of his past arrogance. His colleagues, aware of the incident, tried to reassure him, but Langford knew his credibility had just suffered an irreversible blow. Meanwhile, Marcus resolutely pursued his projects. He oversaw the development of new facilities at the airport, met with strategic partners, and continued to work on initiatives to support ex-service personnel and the local community. Every action he took reinforced his image as a leader, not only through his professional success, but also through his integrity and discipline. One evening at a partners' meeting, one of Marcus's colleagues brought up the plane situation. "You know, Marcus, a lot of people were impressed by how you handled that humiliation. You didn't respond with anger, but by example." Marcus smiled slightly. True revenge isn't about humiliating others. It's about self-control and building success despite obstacles. When you act with dignity, the world will eventually recognize it. At the same time, Langford began to feel the effects of this lesson in even more tangible ways. His business suffered negative repercussions because of the reputation he had created by trying to humiliate Marcus. Partners and clients, informed of the situation, lost trust in him, preferring to partner with respectful and ethical leaders. In this way, Marcus subtly demonstrated that real power is not earned by putting others down, but by leading by example. Every gesture, every decision, every interaction reinforced his moral and public authority, while Langford was left to face his own arrogance and tarnished reputation. Within weeks of the incident, Marcus Taylor had become a symbol of dignity and leadership for many veterans and young professionals. Social media and local media outlets shared stories of his journey, from decorated soldier to successful entrepreneur, and a model of respect and perseverance. Marcus agreed to be invited to a ceremony organized by the airport to honor former military personnel and staff who had contributed to the security and development of the facility. Photographers, journalists, and employees were all present to celebrate his commitment and influence. Richard Langford, meanwhile, was also present, but not as an honored guest. His enforced presence was the result of a mandatory business partnership, and he stood aside, watching Marcus interact with admiration and respect from all present. Every smile, every handshake, every word Marcus spoke echoed the humility and self-control that had made Langford look ridiculous just weeks earlier. In his speech, Marcus addressed the assembly with calm and conviction. "What we do today is not just for ourselves, but to set an example for those around us. True greatness is measured by how we treat others, especially in times when arrogance or prejudice might guide us." A respectful silence fell over the room. The veterans nodded, the young professionals took notes, and Langford stood frozen, unable to articulate anything. The lesson he had refused to understand on the plane was now becoming evident to everyone around him. Later, Marcus spoke with a group of recent graduates who had come for advice. He shared his experience. "In life, you will sometimes face situations where others try to put you down or humiliate you. Never let this define your worth. Respond with respect, hard work, and your successes. The best revenge is to shine without hatred." This approach completely transformed the public perception of Marcus. He was no longer just a soldier or an entrepreneur, but a moral leader and a role model. Langford, for his part, was now the living example of arrogance and intolerance, a countermodel in a story that everyone now knew. Within months of the plane crash, Marcus Taylor had become a nationally recognized figure. The media had followed his career with interest, highlighting his exemplary military career, his entrepreneurial successes, and, above all, his self-control in the face of public humiliation. Lectures, television interviews, and articles praised his integrity and dignity, making him a role model for many. Richard Langford, meanwhile, saw his reputation crumble day by day. His arrogant actions on the plane and his inability to treat Marcus with respect had gone viral on social media. Partner companies, now aware of his past behavior, were beginning to question his reliability and ethics. One morning, Langford received an unexpected call from his main business partner. "Richard, we have decided to suspend our collaboration with your company. Your attitude and public image no longer align with our values." Each word was a new slap in the face, a direct consequence of his past arrogance. Meanwhile, Marcus was planning a charity event to support former military personnel and young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. The invitation was public and publicized, and Marcus invited anyone who wanted to learn and be inspired by his example. The journalists present reminded everyone of the plain scene and the contrast between Marcus's initial humiliation and his moral and social victory. At the event, Marcus delivered a speech that thrilled the audience. Life often presents us with unfair situations. But every injustice is an opportunity to demonstrate our true strength, dignity, patience, and respect. Those who try to bring you down will often find themselves facing their own limitations. Langford, present despite himself, felt for the first time the power of this lesson. Every word Marcus said, every token of success and respect uttered in the room, resonated like a sentence for him. His attempt to humiliate Marcus had backfired, and he understood that this revenge would never be forgotten. Marcus, for his part, had never sought to harm Langford personally. His revenge was silent but complete. Through his success, integrity, and public recognition, he had transformed a humiliation into a universal and irreversible lesson. Langford, humiliated, isolated, and now aware of his error, had to accept the power of dignity and respect in the face of arrogance. Within weeks of the charity event, Marcus Taylor saw the impact of his example spread far beyond the airport or local media. Stories of his calm in the face of humiliation and personal success inspired many young professionals and former military personnel to pursue their ambitions without being intimidated by arrogance or prejudice. Richard Langford, on the other hand, was now in the background. The consequences of his behavior were irreversible. Several key contracts had slipped through his fingers, and his business partners viewed him with suspicion. Social media continued to highlight his behavior on the plane, and each public mention of Marcus reinforced the contrast between Langford's arrogance and Marcus's dignity. One morning, Marcus was invited to an official recognition ceremony for veterans who had contributed to innovation and security at American airports. Photographers and journalists were in attendance in large numbers, and among them was Langford, observing discreetly. Marcus took the podium, looking at the assembly with assured calm. Today we celebrate not only individual achievements, but also the strength of character that allows us to overcome challenges, injustice, and arrogance, he declared. Every word resonated like a universal moral lesson. Langford looked down, unable to contradict or interrupt. Marcus's victory wasn't just personal, it was public and symbolic, a demonstration that respect, integrity, and patience always trump arrogance and hatred. After the ceremony, Marcus took the time to meet with young entrepreneurs and former military personnel. He shared his experience with simplicity. The moments when we could be humiliated are often the most valuable to show our true strength. The best revenge is never in anger or violence, but in self-control and lasting success. Langford left the ceremony in silence, aware that his reputation and image had been deeply damaged. He had never imagined that his arrogance in front of a soldier would come back to haunt him publicly, and that he would become a counterexample of what a true leader is. Marcus, meanwhile, continued on his path with serenity and dignity. Every action, every success, and every word spoken reinforced his influence and moral authority, leaving a lasting lesson for all who had witnessed the story. A few months later, Marcus Taylor was invited to a national gala honoring exemplary leaders in entrepreneurship and public service. The hall was lavishly decorated, with spotlights focused on the attendees. Guests chatted, exchanged business cards, and took photos, but everyone eagerly awaited Marcus's arrival, a symbol of dignity and achievement. Richard Langford, unwillingly present as a secondary guest, watched the scene with a mixture of shame and fascination. Every smile from Marcus, every hug from other leaders and journalists, reminded him of the humiliation he had suffered on the plane months earlier. His arrogance had given way to an irreversible public lesson. When Marcus took the stage to accept his award, the room erupted in applause. He smiled modestly, accepting the trophy while addressing the audience. "This award is not just for me. It is for all those who face injustice and arrogance. True victory is never in humiliating others, but in how we maintain our dignity and inspire others through our actions." Cameras focused on him captured every word, every gesture. The media broadcast the event nationally, recalling the story of the plane and how Marcus had transformed a humiliation into an example of moral greatness. Langford, sitting in the shadows, felt his reputation shattered by Marcus's quiet grandeur. His excuses, his attempts at justification, all of it no longer carried any weight. The whole world had seen Marcus triumph not through confrontation, but through self-control, patience, and dignity. Later that evening, Marcus met with Langford privately. He greeted him politely and with a calm smile. "Mr. Langford, I hope you understand that no amount of arrogance or prejudice can overcome respect and dignity." Langford, humble and dejected, nodded, unable to respond with anything other than a whispered, "Yes. I understand." Marcus left the gala to cheers, leaving behind not only a humiliated opponent, but a world witness to the power of dignity and respect. The lesson was clear: in life, true revenge is not measured by the anger or humiliation of others, but by the success, patience, and integrity one embodies every day. Thus, Marcus Taylor sealed his final victory, a universal lesson in self-control, respect, and moral power, leaving Richard Langford and all those who had doubted him to reflect on their own actions forever.